Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to give this talk in French. Just kidding. That would be a disaster for all of us involved. A couple of things. So first, I don't talk as fast as Robin. I hope that's okay. Most people don't. But I'm sure you learned a tremendous amount in the last conversation. And I'm actually going to turn the technology down a little bit. The technology for me is context for everything that's going on. But it's also very easy to get distracted. I get distracted by shiny things, and I use that literally and metaphorically. And part of my personal path has been learning how technology can be an enabler, but not the answer in and of itself. So some details, including my Twitter handle, if you like. Reminder for myself, this is a drawing made by my daughter, that all of these technologies that we're talking about, whether Watson-flavored AI or a microfluidics personal portable diagnostic system, none of them matter outside of the context of people and how people are connected with each other. So this is a friend of mine. We moonlight together in an urgent care center in California. And he is one of the smartest doctors I've ever worked with. I ask him many questions when I'm not sure what's going on. He's been practicing for about 200 years, and he's seen everything. And we started using an electronic medical record system, an EMR, about 5 years ago in the hospital where I work. And he now spends about half as much time seeing patients as he used to, because he's now a data entry monkey, and he's a really bad monkey. And so this is a little bit of caution for us to think about. We are probably in the most difficult era in history to practice medicine, because we still don't actually know that much more than we did 20 years ago. And all of a sudden, we have made the job of delivering medicine much more complicated, because all of our great technologies are great ideas but aren't that useful yet compared to how difficult some of them are to use. So while we're thinking about a glorious near-term future of EMRs collecting beautiful data, all being put into data warehouses, and AIs aggregating that data and synthesizing real-time insights from it, we have to remember that that isn't working very well when Holly is stuck doing this, and I'm also not sure about the quality of the data that he's putting in. This is a very fixable problem, and this problem will be gone in 10 years, I suspect. But 10 years is a long time, and the things that we're thinking about iterating on and improving on today have some challenges. Now, the other piece that we think a lot about is the massive amounts of data that are coming out of us. And those may be zeros and ones coming out of, this is, some of you may know about Hugo Campos. He's very public about his implanted cardioverter defibrillator and has been working very hard to get access to his own data. Those zeros and ones might be ACs, Ts, and Gs. And the biological and data networks here are fascinating. But they're not, I hope to convince you, as interesting as the networks of people that they represent. I'm going to grab my water. So I think about the last 20, 25 years as having occurred in two phases. The first half of the internet, as we've experienced it, was one where we all of a sudden had a library at our fingertips. Billions of documents on the planet, indexed by Google and others, and now accessible to us in a really simple search box. Completely changed with the way we think about information. Our children, for those of you old enough to have children, really have a hard time contemplating what it used to be like only 20 years ago. So that was replaced. The second half, if you think about the first half of the internet as being a Google-flavored half, the second half has been more metaphorically about Facebook. All that information, cross-linked and indexed, is now simply context for a network of people that are interconnected with each other, referring to the documents but not just a one-to-many interaction between people and documents, but now we have many-to-many on top of many-to-many, and that's where it starts to get really interesting. So I'm going to ask a question. How many people here have read or know about a book called Reinventing Discovery? Excellent. Very few. I highly recommend taking a look at this fascinating book, which is essentially about how networks of people, or crowdsourcing, is changing science. Not medicine in particular, but including medicine. And I'm going to tell you one story that will only ruin the very beginning of the book. And it is a story about chess master Garry Kasparov. And you probably know the story about when Kasparov played against IBM supercomputer Deep Blue. This is a less popular story. Kasparov played in the year 1999-2000, I think, played a chess match against a team called The World. And it was asynchronous, and it happened online, so there was plenty of time between moves. And anybody in the world was allowed to sign up for the World team. And each move by the World team would be decided by democratic vote. Good idea? Bad idea? Sounds like a terrible idea to me. So what happened was, several thousand people ended up on the World team. And Kasparov won, but he said it was one of the toughest matches that he's ever played. It took him about 65 moves to win. And about half the time, maybe about 30 of those scenarios, someone on the World team who had been, say, a junior champion or a very active amateur chess player said, wait a second, I recognize this configuration of the chessboard. I know what we should do here. And that person was compelling enough that the community around him or her said, we should vote with this guy. And then a couple moves later, someone else, wait a second, I've studied this configuration of the chessboard. You should listen to me. And the community decided when that made sense and almost beat the best chess player on the planet. So I think you know where this is going. What happens when all of a sudden we have a network of people who have essentially no barriers between them, and they want to help each other solve health problems? Now, the point of the story is absolutely not that non-professionals should totally, in an isolated way, answer all the questions they have, make diagnoses, prescribe drugs, and live healthier lives. It's not going to work that way. But each of these people has access to different parts of the healthcare system. So these people have honorary diplomas symbolized on their heads. When someone in the online kidney cancer community that I work with joins the community and says, hey, I have a question about the role of radiation therapy in kidney cancer. It's one subset of the network that says, hey, we have experience with radiation therapy and kidney cancer. Here's what I just learned at MD Anderson, where I went for a second opinion. Oh, here's what I just read. It turns out I'm pretty good at reading literature, and here are the most recent papers. Actually, there's this other paper that's more recent that you didn't know about. Oh, thanks for letting me know. They're micro-experts, not experts with formal training. They're micro-experts who have access to information recently, are more motivated than anyone else on the planet to understand how it applies to their context, and as a network are constantly checking each other to ensure or maximize the probability of accuracy. When someone comes in with a very different question, say, I was just diagnosed with kidney cancer, I'm scheduled for a surgery, this is the kind of surgery I'm getting, and this is where I'm going to get it, anything I should know, it's a different subset of the community that steps forward and helps lead the conversation. And this is wildly different from the way we practice medicine. So when I see patients in the urgent care center, I'm a generalist, I'm not an oncologist, I'm a general internist, I'm expected to be able to answer by myself, without checking with anyone else, maybe 80 to 90% of the questions that come up. 10 or 20% of the time, the system will allow me to get a consultation. Very different the way an informal, unregulated, uncompensated system organizes itself. The contrasts are very interesting. So what are these people talking about? This is a quick break for humor. Real story, real image from the internet. Taking these antidepressants didn't make me any less depressed, but they did make me shit myself in church. I think I know how to say that in French, but I won't. So what are patients and their loved ones and their families talking about? So sometimes they're talking about things that seem funny, almost trivial. Actually, this is both funny and depressing and very important, and there's a lot that we can learn from it. But the kind of discussion that I'm talking about is different. I'm talking about a network of people interacting with each other, and I'm going to show you a de-identified screenshot from the system that I work with. It's called Smart Patients. And this is from a community of patients and caregivers dealing with multiple myeloma, a blood cancer. And the couple of things that I want to point out to you, I'm signed in here as a fictional person, Joe. And Joe is seeing the top two conversations here in his conversation feed. The first one is very straightforward. Someone is saying, my husband is thinking now about whether to do more chemotherapy or go for a very complicated and risky procedure. And several people share their own experiences with both of those paths, where they've been seen, what they've learned, what they wish they had known earlier. Now, the second conversation is even more interesting, because at the very bottom of the screen, you'll notice that it's tagged not just with multiple myeloma, but with the tag for neuropathy. So this is a myeloma patient who has a complication of multiple myeloma, neuropathy, kind of a pain or tingling, a little bit of numbness due to damage of the peripheral nerves. But what happens with this one, because it's tagged with neuropathy, there are patients with ovarian cancer who have neuropathy as a side effect of chemotherapy, patients with diabetes who have neuropathy as a result of complications with diabetes, who also contribute to this discussion. In medicine, we're very used to silos. There's the GI doctor and the pulmonary doctor and the ENT doctor. Patients don't care nearly as much about the silos that we like to organize things in, and some of the most interesting conversations they have are horizontal ones, whether they're based on a symptom or a procedure they both had, or the fact that they're caregivers and have a lot of experience to share with what it's like to care for someone with a severe illness, sometimes independent of what the illness happens to be. A very surprising thing to me happened as we were building this network of patients, and that is the patient said to us, many of us, because we actually, so I should have mentioned, Smart Patients started as an oncology-only community. It has since expanded beyond there. Because of the initial cancer focus, many of the patients said, hey guys, would you build for us a clinical trial search engine that works better than the one that the government offers? And we said, no, that's way out of scope. We're just trying to build a simple communication platform. But the patients insisted, and we luckily eventually understood that they were the ones that we should be listening to with our product roadmap. And something very interesting happened. We put together a search engine that's better than the one the government offers. That was that was a very low bar. But the most important feature about this is not just that patients want to find a clinical trial that might be relevant to them, but they want to find a clinical trial and start a conversation about it with the community, which is, by the way, why it made sense for us to do this. And so if we take this hypothetical example of looking for a trial about Crohn's disease, it's very easy for someone to find a trial and then press a button to start a conversation about that trial and pose the question to their community. For example, I just found out about this trial. Perhaps my doctor told me about it. Perhaps I read about it somewhere. I've never heard of this new therapy. What do you guys know? And this is someone doing homework in between doctor visits so they can have a more informed conversation with their clinician. Now, what does this mean that we have large numbers of untrained non-professionals talking about technical things that we, as a clinical community, don't think they're talking about? What it means, not only that it makes us uncomfortable in certain ways, which I'm happy to discuss, but it means that we have a huge untapped resource. There are, when we think that in our current construct that there are maybe 1,000 experts in the world who understand what's going on with a given trial or a given aspect of a trial, and there's actually 100,000 patients who are having increasingly educated conversations about that trial, what are we learning from those patients? One thing that we've started to do as a company at Smart Patients is we've started to ask patients, hey, how could this trial be designed better? The concept of a patient helping design a trial, the first time you hear about it, sounds like asking your untrained 10-year-old daughter to fix your car. But in this case, it's a little bit different because this patient has dealt with the disease, they've evaluated trials, they have decided which trials to consider joining, which ones not, they've learned from each other, they know very well what's tolerable to them in terms of how often they'll get certain procedures or how often they'll travel across the country, how often they can afford to miss work. So here, we've taken the simple example of A/B testing that any reasonable software engineer or front-end software engineer knows about today of, well, let's just build two websites, and see which one people like better and why. And we're applying those same very simple A/B testing principles to the previously very complicated, only accessible to experts process of how do we design a clinical trial. And so far, it's working quite well. Now, I think that helping design clinical trials is really only scratching the surface of what we can ask patients to help us do to improve healthcare. In most countries, patients see their clinicians a relatively small number of days during the year. I'll estimate that a typical patient who has only a modest number of issues maybe spends 100 minutes a year with their physician. There are 500,000 other minutes during the year where that patient is dealing with their illnesses, learning about what they need, figuring out what questions they have, learning from each other. That's a tremendous amount of real expertise that, when queried appropriately, can help us make the system work better. So what are some of the things that patients are really talking about? Before we get too far down the road of thinking about interesting technical things like having patients design clinical trials, it's worth remembering that sometimes the most important words that patients hear when they get sick and they find a community, whether it's in person or online, is, "You are not alone." Tremendously scary when you or a loved one gets a diagnosis. For those of you who have experienced this, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't, you can imagine it, but it's still very difficult to imagine if you don't experience it. And just hearing "you are not alone" is a tremendous weight off your shoulders. And then furthermore, hearing "we can help you figure this out because we've been through it before you" is empowering. Some of the topics that we see being talked about a lot on Smart Patients, which are often surprising to people outside of the communities, are, "Hey, can you help me prepare for my upcoming appointment? I'm going with Mom to see the radiation oncologist about treating a new metastasis. Any advice on what kind of questions I should ask? If this was your mom, would you want her to get advice from other patients who have recently been dealing with this? We have a clinic appointment coming up next week, and our clinic sent a questionnaire about our goals. What kind of goals should I be thinking about? Would it be better for patients to talk with each other before that visit to have a more informed, efficient visit? Ask questions if you don't understand. Don't be embarrassed if you have no clue. And remember, the doctor is human too. These are patients protecting doctors from other patients. Probably the most important question that we see being asked, either explicitly or implicitly, is "what I wish I knew." And this is, I think, a phrase which can encompass all of the kinds of things that we can learn from each other. What we wish we knew sooner. Instant menopause from chemotherapy. Take one step at a time. For the rest of our lives, priorities and decisions will be affected. Think about how different it is to compare our current system, which is a patient, maybe with her family, goes to see the doctor, and they maybe see another doctor, and then 6 months later, they'll see the doctor again, and they have all these point interactions. And what instead sometimes is happening, and can be happening more, is they are actually in a network of people who are having those same interactions, and we can, in a high-quality way, be tapping into all that implicit knowledge to make their experience better. So my main message, as you are developing drugs or building a new online service or deciding how to improve the patient experience in your hospital, is not to think about the patient as a passive recipient of your care or a passive participant in your study, but to think about them as a future collaborator. a future collaborator that can help you get your job done better, because I promise you they are at least as motivated as you, and they probably know more than you expect them to. One of the things that we are starting to do, hopefully to go in this direction in terms of learning from patients, is about 3 weeks ago we launched a new service. We have our patient communities in one place, and we just launched a service for clinicians. And the idea is that this is a case-based learning platform where we take stories, cases from the patient communities, ask the patient's permission, can we use your story as a teaching case after we de-identify it? And we take that as a real-time or near real-time learning system for clinicians who can see what their patients are going through, what patients in general and what patients at their institution are going through. That's just an early prototype of an idea of how can we help the healthcare system learn from what these patients are doing in these patient networks. So I invite you to ask the question, what can you learn from patients to do your jobs better in order to serve them? And I promise you that if you ask the question nicely, they will say, yes, we would like to collaborate with you. And if you find out otherwise, tell me, and I'd love to discuss with you so that I can learn from it. If any of the things that I've talked about are things that you would like to learn more about, I'd welcome communication from any of you. My email's there. And this very simple drawing is my attempt to summarize what I think the future of healthcare is all about. And it's less about delivering service and developing products and more about doing all those things, but in the context of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Roni. I gladly accept your offer to discuss more. I have a couple of questions for you, and we have a couple of minutes before you have your break. So, you're a doctor yourself, and I was wondering, we already talked about the reluctance of doctors about the empowered patients, and I would like to know, what did your fellow physicians say to you when you first presented your idea to them? Were they happy about it?
Well, no. So I guess about 10 years ago, when I started working at Google, and one of my main responsibilities was to improve the quality of the search results that come back when you ask a health question. Among my friends, I became known as the guy who is constantly telling their patients all kinds of nonsense that they read on the internet. And similar to the generalization I made about the first half of the internet being about content or networked documents and the second half being about networked people. And here I must apologize. My experience and my biases are very US-centric. I don't have a lot of intuition about how well they generalize, so with that caveat. I see medical professionals just now past the tipping point where they are no longer upset about their patients going online.
What about the doctors who are still upset about it? What would you recommend them? Should it be a topic in the practice at all to discuss what you can find online?
Well, I mean, so I think you have two choices. One is you can pretend it's not happening and do a really shitty job of taking care of your patient. Or you can decide how you would like to make it work better. So the simplest thing is find 5 websites that you think in general are a good source of information and explicitly tell your patient, here are some places which I find reliable in general, and I welcome your questions about what you find. I think one of the myths is that if we invite or acknowledge that invite our patients to search the internet or acknowledge that they're doing so, that's going to cause us to spend 10 minutes out of maybe 15 that we have talking about all the misinformation they found. And I think just the opposite is true. I think it results in better, more efficient communication. And even if it does take up more time, the alternative is to pretend that isn't happening and completely alienate the patient from alienate the doctor from the patient.
I'm talking about misinformation. Do you have like doctors proofreading what patients share, or what's your opinion on that?
Absolutely not. So there's several different ways of running online communities, running patient communities. So one model is to have an expert who is controlling everything. So for example, in the multiple myeloma community, maybe there would be a hematologist who is reading everything and ensuring that it's high quality. There's a few things that don't, in my opinion, don't work well with that model. One is that if you find me a hematologist that's good enough for that job, I promise you they will be very busy doing other jobs. So it's just from a resource perspective, it's totally unscalable. The other is that every individual has biases. And even if you found one really good clinician or two or three to run a given community, they have blind spots and they have biases. And I think that a more successful model, as well as a more scalable model, is one where the community has a fundamental responsibility to challenge each other. So when someone says something in one of our communities, or at least one of the high quality ones, there's a whole range. Some of them are new and they're not taking off. Some of them are in between. Some of them are extremely robust. In one of the well-running communities, when someone says something that's for example, which there exists evidence to contradict it, within half an hour, another patient will say, hey, you know, I'm not sure if that's right. Here is a paper. Are you aware of some new evidence? Oh, no, I was just sharing an anecdote. Well, best of luck to you, but you know, when data exists, we have to go with the data. A lot of times, we only have anecdotes, but if there's data, data wins. And you get a network together, and again, we don't think about networks in medicine very much because we don't practice medicine as a network in any real sense. But when you get highly motivated people, they don't have time or tolerance for BS. So it's actually a remarkably effective model.
Great. So I already understood how the technology will change the interaction between physician and patients. So I would like to know from you what you think the role of the patient will be in future in terms of politics, healthcare politics, and research. If you have any ideas about that.
Oh, no, I have no ideas about that. Just kidding. So we're in a really fascinating and challenging time. Whether it's in the actual delivery in healthcare, even in drug discovery, certainly in patient advocacy, definitely in politics. Over the previous 10 years through the next 10 years, a complete transformation of the patient to sort of under-informed customer being elevated to demanding colleague. And in different contexts, it's working well. In some contexts, it's working terribly. There's a lot of egos involved, a lot of people who don't like to share power. I don't like to share power, by the way, in case anyone was wondering. It makes us very uncomfortable. And I think that one of the most fascinating things that I see happening in both healthcare delivery and in research is that we're starting to see a move towards having the patients get more loud, more insistent on helping define what the desirable outcomes are. So if the EMA or the FDA is today saying that a drug is going to be approved because it improves progression-free survival as measured by the size of a tumor, and a patient says, well, I don't actually really care how big my tumor is. I care if I can walk up the stairs or hold my grandson. That's a very complicated conversation that's starting to happen, and that kind of conversation is happening all across the spectrum from the science to the policy.
Great. Thank you so much, Roni.